2 years ago, my dad kicked me out of the house with $10 in my pocket and a warning to never come back. No argument, no explanation, just the cold slam of the front door and the sound of my life shattering on the other side. That night, I slept in a cheap motel that smelled like bleach and regret, wondering how a father could treat his daughter like disposable trash. For 2 years, we didn't speak. No calls on my birthday. No Merry Christmas. Just silence and the occasional rumor, twisted to make me the villain. Then, last week, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was warm, almost syrupy, as he said he and my stepmother needed a temporary place to stay. My place. The lakefront home I built from nothing. I agreed to dinner this weekend. But this time, the ending would be mine to write. The rain was tapping against the wide glass panes of my living room, blurring the reflection of the city lights across Lake Washington. My home had that warm, lived-in stillness I'd fought to build Italian marble in the entryway. The low hum of a designer espresso machine in the kitchen. Shelves lined with hard-earned books and contracts. It was the kind of place you walk into and know someone had to claw their way up to get here. That night, I was reviewing renovation bids for a new property in Queen Anne, pen in hand, when my phone lit up on the desk beside me. The name on the screen froze me. Dad. For a moment, I just stared. 2 years of silence, and now this? My first instinct was to let it ring out, let him wonder if my number had changed. But curiosity has a way of outweighing pride, at least for the first few seconds. I picked up on the third ring. Camila, he said, in that carefully smoothed-over tone I recognized immediately. Warm, too warm, like it had been reheated in the microwave and served with a smile. Dad, I replied, my voice flat. I've missed you. I was hoping we could talk. Maybe dinner this weekend? Your stepmom and I, well, we've been going through a bit of a rough patch, and we might need a temporary place to stay. Temporary. I rolled the word around in my mind like a coin you're not sure is counterfeit. I see, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. My eyes drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the rain streaking down in shimmering lines. It would mean a lot, he continued, to be together again, you know, as a family. That word family sat heavy between us. I thought about the last time I heard him use it, the night he'd told me to pack my things, handed me a crisp 10 bill, and said, "It's for gas. Good luck out there." I remembered the way my fingers shook, not from cold but from disbelief, as I turned the key in my old sedan and drove into a future I hadn't planned for. I could almost hear his discomfort through the phone now, the way his breath caught when the silence stretched too long. "Sure," I said finally, keeping my tone neutral. "Dinner? My place or yours?" "Yours would be nice," he answered quickly, too quickly. "Let's do yours," I countered, letting him think it was his idea. "Saturday, 6 p.m. He exhaled, relieved. "Perfect. We'll cook. You'll love it." I ended the call with a polite goodbye, my thumb lingering over the red button longer than necessary. My reflection in the dark glass smiled back at me, not the polite smile I gave him, but the one that knew exactly how this was going to end. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. The smell of frying onions used to mean comfort to me. That night, it meant something else entirely, cover for a conversation no one wanted to have in the open. I had just finished my late shift at the diner, shoes soaked from the Seattle drizzle, apron stuffed into my bag. My key scraped against the lock of the front door, and I stepped inside to find boxes. Not mine, not labeled, just stacked along the hallway like silent guards. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands clasped, knuckles white. Across from him was Marlene, my stepmother, stirring something on the stove without looking at me. "What's going on?" I asked, setting my bag down slowly, scanning the room for answers. Dad didn't waste time. "Camila, you need to pack your things, tonight." My brain lagged behind his words, like they were coming through a bad connection. "Pack? For what?" "You can't stay here anymore," he said, his voice clipped, final. "It's not working out." I looked to Marlene, but she kept her back to me, her spoon moving in slow circles. "You're 24, he went on, "and you still haven't figured out what you want to do. It's time you learned how to stand on your own." Stand on my own? I'd been working 2 jobs since I was 18. paying for my own car, buying most of my own groceries. The only thing I hadn't done was leave because I thought family mattered more than independence. I just need a little more time, I said quietly, my voice threading between anger and pleading. He shook his head. No, you need a wake-up call. That's when he reached into his wallet and pulled out a single, crisp bill. $10. He held it between two fingers like a token, not an insult. For gas. At least get yourself to a motel. I took it without thinking, because refusing it felt like slamming the last door I had left. The air in the kitchen grew heavier, the smell of onions turning acrid. My childhood photos still hung on the wall by the fridge, each one suddenly feeling like a relic from a museum about someone else's life. I remember walking to my room, the floor creaking under my steps. My suitcase was small, meant for weekend trips, not exile. I packed in silence, listening to the faint hiss of oil in the kitchen, the clink of the spoon against the pan. When I came back out, Dad didn't meet my eyes. Marlene finally turned, offering me a polite, tight smile, the kind you give to strangers in a grocery store aisle. I walked out into the cold night, my breath a pale cloud in the streetlight. The 10 bill in my pocket felt heavier than the suitcase in my hand. I didn't know it then, but that moment would be the spark that burned away the last illusion I had about what family meant. The motel room smelled like disinfectant and stale air, the kind that sticks to your clothes and follows you around like an unwanted shadow. A flickering neon vacancy sign outside my window blinked through the thin curtains, each flash reminding me where I was. It was $245 a week, paid in cash. Cheaper if you didn't mind the broken heater and the water that ran rust brown for the first minute. I minded, but I didn't have the luxury to care. My first night there, I ate instant noodles from a styrofoam cup, balancing it on the small desk wedged between the bed and the wall. The hum of traffic on the highway was constant, like the world was rushing past while I stood still. I told myself it was temporary. 1 week, maybe 2. But weeks have a way of turning into months when you're scrambling for hours at a diner and picking up late-night shifts cleaning offices downtown. My hands toughened from scrubbing, my shoulders ached from carrying trays. But slowly, money began to trickle in. I stopped counting in dollars and started counting in hundreds. Then came the call that changed everything, not from Dad, but from a coworker named Elise. She knew someone selling an old house in Beacon Hill. The place was falling apart. Cracked foundation, leaky roof, peeling paint that made it look abandoned. The kind of house that made most people turn away. They just want it gone, Elise told me. It's basically a teardown. I went to see it anyway. The air inside smelled like dust and old wood. Floorboards groaned with each step, but under the grime and neglect, I saw lines of potential: the high ceilings, the original crown molding, the view from the upstairs bedroom that caught the sunset just right. It was listed for $39,000. My entire savings at that point was just over $15,000. A ridiculous gap. But I couldn't stop picturing what it could be. I scraped together the rest, borrowing a little from Elise, picking up double shifts for weeks, selling the only nice piece of jewelry I owned, a necklace my mom gave me before she passed. The day I signed the papers, I stood in that living room with the peeling wallpaper and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Possibility. I didn't know much about repairs, but I knew how to learn. YouTube videos, library books, late-night forums where other DIY renovators swapped tips. My days became a blur of sanding, painting, hauling debris to the dumpster out back. I ruined more than one pair of jeans and developed a permanent streak of paint under my nails. By the time I sold it 6 months later, I walked away with $22,000 in profit. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof. Proof that I could turn ruin into something worth living in. And that was all I needed to start again. That first sale lit a fire in me I didn't know I still had. The motel room, with its sagging mattress and flickering light, became less of a prison and more of a staging ground. Every profit I made went back into the next project. I stopped seeing houses as homes and started seeing them as puzzles, broken pieces waiting for the right hands to make them whole again. By the end of that first year, I'd flipped 3 properties. None of them were glamorous. One had raccoons in the attic. Another had plumbing so bad I had to learn how to solder copper pipes from a retired plumber who worked for beer money. But each sale added to my reserves, and with every closing check, I felt the weight of that 10 bill shrink in my memory. In the spring of my second year, I bought my first serious risk, a foreclosed Victorian in Queen Anne. The bank was desperate to unload it after the previous owner defaulted mid-renovation. Half the kitchen was gutted, the walls were bare studs in some rooms, and the wiring looked like a plate of spaghetti. Most people saw a disaster. I saw an opportunity. It took 6 months of 14-hour days, but when I sold it, I cleared $210,000 in profit. That's when I knew I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building. I upgraded from the motel to a small one-bedroom apartment. Then, 6 months later, I signed for my own home, a 2-story lakefront property with glass walls that made the water feel like part of the living room. Standing in that space for the first time, I thought about the night I'd stood outside my dad's house, suitcase in hand, and realized this view was the proof of how far I'd come. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. About never again being at the mercy of someone else's decision to toss me out like I didn't matter. I learned to read market trends like a second language. I started working with contractors I trusted, the kind who didn't flinch when I showed up in work boots and gloves instead of heels and a clipboard. My portfolio grew: Beacon Hill, Capitol Hill, Belltown Lofts. 2 years after that night with the Sen bill, my net worth had crossed into 7 figures. I had a network of agents calling me with off-market deals, lenders offering me favorable terms, and a small but loyal team who knew how I worked: fast, precise, and without excuses. It was during one of those quiet evenings, spreadsheet open, espresso in hand, that I first heard his name again. A mutual acquaintance mentioned my dad in passing, saying he'd run into some financial trouble. I remember a small, sharp satisfaction at the thought, but I didn't dwell on it. My world was finally mine, at least until the night his name lit up my phone screen. I didn't know it then, but the climb I'd made wasn't just leading me away from the life he'd thrown me out of. It was circling back, straight into the confrontation I didn't realize I'd been preparing for all along. The rain was steady on the night of the call, the kind that turns the city into a blur of streetlight reflections and slick pavement. I had been in my office, reviewing the numbers for a duplex in Fremont, when my phone lit up again with that familiar name, Dad. I answered on the third ring. "Camila," he said, his tone dipped in the same manufactured warmth I'd heard 2 nights earlier. "Your stepmom and I were talking, and we'd love for you to come to dinner this Saturday. We can make it just like old times." Old times? I almost laughed out loud. The last family dinner I remembered ended with me packing my suitcase while Marlene sautéed onions, pretending I didn't exist. "What's the occasion?" I asked, my voice even. "Well," he said, hesitating just long enough to be suspicious, "we thought it'd be nice to reconnect. Start fresh." Start fresh. Another coin-polished phrase meant to slide over the real reason. "Dinner's fine," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What time?" 6 o'clock. At our place." He sounded relieved, like the hardest part was over. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet, listening to the rain drum against the glass. People don't change overnight. If my father was reaching out, there was a reason, and it wasn't just nostalgia. Saturday came. The air was sharp with early winter, and I drove across the bridge with the skyline glowing behind me. Their house looked smaller than I remembered, its paint more faded, the lawn less kept. Marlene opened the door in a dress that was trying a little too hard, her smile wide but eyes scanning me the way a realtor sizes up a buyer. "Camila, you look amazing," she gushed, pulling me into a hug that lasted exactly as long as it needed to feel performative. Inside, the table was set for 3. Candles, the good plates, a roast that filled the room with a scent I recognized but didn't trust. We made small talk over salad, the conversation skimming over safe topics: weather, the cost of gas, the Seahawks. But halfway through the main course, Dad put his fork down and cleared his throat. "Camila, we've been thinking," he began. "You've done so well for yourself. And well, we're going through a bit of a transition." Marlene jumped in, her voice all gentle urgency. "We thought maybe we could all work together, combine resources. There's this investment opportunity." There it was, the real invitation. Not to dinner, to my bank account. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "A family venture," Dad said. Just a little capital to get us back on our feet. 200,000 should cover the startup phase. 200,000. Not 10, not 20. 200. I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. That's specific. They both leaned forward slightly, like sharks sensing a drop of blood in the water. Just think about it, Marlene said. Family sticks together. I sipped my wine and let the moment stretch, filing away every word. If they thought this was going to be a simple yes or no conversation, they didn't know me at all. I didn't give them an answer at dinner. Instead, I smiled, thanked them for the meal, and promised to think about it. What I was really thinking about was how fast I could verify what I already suspected, that this wasn't about a golden investment opportunity. It was about survival, their survival, and I wanted to know exactly why they needed me to keep them afloat. The next morning, I called in a favor. A client I'd sold a commercial property to last year had a brother, Dean Larson, who worked as a private investigator. Former FBI. Dean had the kind of calm, clipped voice that made you believe he'd seen everything and didn't need to exaggerate. I need background checks on 2 people, I told him. Full workup, debts, legal issues, business records, anything you can get without breaking the law, and it stays between us. Dean didn't ask why. Send me their full names, dates of birth, and any addresses you've got. I'll have something for you in a week. It only took 4 days. When I met him at his office, he slid 2 thick folders across his desk like they weighed more than paper should. Your father first, he said. Last year, he borrowed heavily from 3 different private lenders to fund a real estate development in Tacoma. The project stalled. He defaulted on 2 of those loans. Total debt currently sits at just over 400. At least one lender has hinted at taking it to court. I flipped through the folder loan agreements. Overdue notices, terse emails from lenders threatening legal action. The man who once told me to stand on my own had built himself a house of cards. Dean tapped the second folder. Your stepmother is more creative. She's been running a charity drive through social media claims to raise funds for cancer patients. She's collected about 180 in donations over the past year. That's a lot of goodwill money, I said, already knowing what was coming. According to her medical records, Dean went on, she's never had cancer, not a single diagnosis, and none of the listed beneficiaries exist, at least, not in the names she's using publicly. In the business, we call this charity fraud. The IRS calls it unreported income. I closed the folder slowly, my nails tapping against the cardboard cover. Every suspicion I'd had about their sudden interest in family was now printed in black and white. Dean leaned back in his chair. You've got enough here to cause them serious legal trouble. The question is, what do you want to do with it? That question stayed with me on the drive home, the city lights blurring past in streaks of gold and red. What did I want to do? Part of me wanted to confront them directly, slam the evidence on the table, and watch their faces crumble. But another part, the smarter part, wanted something more. Not just justice, but timing. The kind of timing that would make sure the damage landed exactly where it needed to. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the answer was clear. If they wanted to play the long con, they were about to meet someone who'd perfected the long game. Saturday came again, 1 week after our family dinner. This time, the invitation was mine. I told Dad and Marlene I wanted to talk about their proposal over dinner at my place. I insisted on cooking. They didn't need to know I'd already cooked something else entirely. The plan. My lakefront home looked perfect that night. The candles were lit, the fireplace flickered, the table set for 3. I'd even opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Apparently, poetic justice counts. They arrived right on time. Dad in his best jacket, Marlene in a pearl necklace that I'd later learn was bought with charity money. You've really done well for yourself, Camila, Marlene said, scanning the open-concept living room with eyes that calculated more than admired. I've worked hard, I replied simply, motioning them to sit. We made small talk through the salad course, my hands steady as I poured the wine. I could feel their anticipation building with every sip, every polite laugh. They were waiting for me to bring it up, the 200. By the time the roast was served, Dad cleared his throat. So, have you thought more about what we discussed? I leaned back, meeting his eyes. I have. And I want to help. Marlene's face lit up, her fork pausing midair. That's wonderful, Camila. You won't regret it. Oh, I won't, I said, reaching under the table to pull out 2 manila folders. I slid one to each of them. In fact, I think you'll find this arrangement enlightening. They looked down, confused at first. Then the color began to drain from Marlene's face as she flipped through the pages copies of bank statements, emails, loan defaults, and in her case, screenshots of her charity transactions. Dad's jaw tightened. Where did you get this? Let's just say I did my homework, I said evenly. Before I invest in anything, I like to know the full scope of my partner's history. Marlene slammed her folders shut. This is an invasion of privacy. No, I said, my voice cool but razor sharp. This is due diligence. And honestly, I'm still being generous. Because I could send all of this to the IRS, the state attorney general, and those private lenders you've been dodging. Dad's face was red now, a vein pulsing in his temple. You think you're better than us just because you made some money? No, I said, leaning forward, my elbows on the table. I think I'm smarter than you. Because I learned something the night you gave me that 10 bill. When someone shows you how little they value you, you believe them and you make sure you never need them again. Silence. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fireplace. I let the moment breathe before I continued. Here's my offer. I don't report you. You don't contact me again. Ever. You get to walk away without a court date, and I get to keep my peace. Marlene opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. If either of you tries to push me, I'll make sure your lenders and the authorities get every piece of this. And I'll make sure the news picks it up. We both know scandal plays better when there's a nice photo to go with it. Dad's shoulders slumped slightly, the fight draining out of him. You've changed, he muttered. I smiled, slow and deliberate. No, Dad. I just stopped letting you decide who I am. They left 15 minutes later, folders clutched in their hands like unexploded grenades. I watched from the window as their car pulled away, disappearing into the dark. For a long time after, I stood there, glass of wine in hand, the reflection of the lake shimmering behind me. It wasn't victory I felt. It was something quieter, deeper freedom. I went upstairs, opened my safe, and pulled out that same 10 bill from 2 years ago. I'd kept it all this time, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of what I'd built in its place. I slipped it back inside, locked the safe, and walked away without looking back. Because some debts don't need to be collected. They just need to be remembered. The night after the confrontation, the house felt different. Quieter, lighter, as if it had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I made tea instead of pouring another glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the lake. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for a call, a message, or a rumor twisted to paint me as the ungrateful daughter. I'd set my boundary, and they had no choice but to respect it. Over the next few weeks, life moved forward in the way it always does, one small, ordinary moment at a time. I closed on a new property, hired a contractor I trusted, and took a weekend trip to Portland with Elise just because we could. No drama, no fear, just living. Sometimes, I'd catch myself wondering if Dad and Marlene had tried their investment pitch on someone else, or if they'd learned anything from the night they walked out of my house with those folders. But then I'd remember something important. It didn't matter. Because the point wasn't to change them, it was to protect me. One rainy Sunday, I cleaned out my home office. Buried in a drawer, under old receipts and expired warranties, I found the key to my safe. On impulse, I opened it and pulled out the 10 bill. It was creased, worn at the edges, still faintly smelling of the leather wallet I'd kept it in during those motel months. I ran my thumb over its surface, remembering how heavy it had felt that night, like a verdict. Now, it felt weightless. I thought about framing it, maybe hanging it in my office as a reminder of where I'd started. But in the end, I slipped it back into the safe. Not to forget. Just to keep it close, where it belongs, not as a wound but as a marker of the day I stopped being someone else's burden and started being my own salvation. The rain softened to a drizzle, and sunlight broke through in streaks across the lake. I watched it for a long while, knowing the chapter was closed not because they said it was, but because I had written the last line myself. Some endings are quiet, this one was mine.